Okay, everybody, I just want to welcome everybody here to the webinar. We're going to get started here in about a minute. So we'll give folks a few more seconds to get here, and then we'll get started. In the webinar software, you should be able to chat and ask me questions. If somebody could just chat me to let me know that you can see my screen, that would be outstanding. You should see a PowerPoint slide deck. Okay, awesome. Thank you very, very much. Excellent. Okay, it's 2 o'clock Eastern time, so let's go ahead and get this thing started. We have a lot of stuff that we're going to attempt to do here within the next hour, so we don't want to really waste any time. We want to go ahead and dive into this. Before I say anything about anything, I want to mention this at the outset for everybody. In the webinar software, you'll notice there's a box for asking questions. That's the right place to ask questions as we're going through the webinar. Now, I'm not going to answer questions until the very end, and we're expecting a lot of attendees, so I might be slightly selective in which questions I answer and which ones I don't, based upon our content that we're covering here. We have a lot of big topics, and it's very easy to go down one path versus another and really get into lots of details. Anyways, so as we're going through, just go ahead and ask your questions as we're going along, and then myself and the two people who are helping me here will go through and make sure that we're getting all the questions and responding back to you all here, and this should be a lot of fun. So let's go ahead and get things kicked off here. So my name is Eric Green. I write software, I do blog posting, I create videos. I recently started doing live streaming, and of course I teach classes both in person and online. And so that's basically what I do. So we're going to go through and talk about some topics here that are interesting to me. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to do a webinar where we kind of combined a couple of topics together. You'll see webinars on .NET Core 3, you'll see webinars on Mongo or even just Cosmos DB in general. You'll see webinars on Azure, but I wanted to try to attempt to bring all three of these things together and kind of show how they all work together. I don't know about most of you all, but I can sit down and get something working in .NET Core 3, or I can get some type of Mongo database up and running, or I can get something working in Azure. But trying to tie all of it together and going out and searching all the documentation to bring the parts and pieces together can be very challenging and difficult. So what we're going to do as we go through this process, I'm going to share with you some of the bumps and bruises that I've learned from along the way in trying to make these technologies work together. So before we actually dive into the content itself, let me just talk a little bit about Wintellect here. So Wintellect provides the following core services: consulting, instructor-led training, that's the part that I participate in, as well as on-demand training. Wintellect is known around the world, particularly for their specialty of knowledge in working with Microsoft technologies. They're certainly not limited to Microsoft technologies. They teach a lot of open source technologies like web development and stuff like that, but particularly in the Microsoft world, Wintellect is very well known for their expertise in delivering these core services. You can see some of the awards and some of the partnerships that they have accumulated over the years here. Now, all of us go to the bookstore or go to Amazon or find a book online and we read the book and we learn information from it. Wintellect actually writes the books. They actually create a lot of the books that you've encountered over the years in doing your Windows development and other related topics. They've actually written those books, and those books are not only used by programmers and developers and system admins in the industry, but they're also used by the folks at Microsoft themselves. And so when you're looking for an organization that you want to partner with and do things with, you want to find an organization that's actually producing the content that's helping to shape the programming world that you're working in, and Wintellect absolutely falls into that category. Now, for those who are attending the webinar, we have a couple of special deals we'd like to offer you. First of all, a 10% discount on any public virtual mock courses that we offer, a 10% discount on Microsoft certification roles training. Also, we want to offer a basically a free briefing on App Dev Cloud and any question and answers you might have concerning that. And we're happy to discuss whatever your project or topic of interest is. Maybe have a one-on-one briefing or maybe a lunch and learn. And we like to talk about things like the Azure Cloud, DevOps, data and AI, modern web development, and a lot more. We're also offering a 10% discount on private on-site training. That's where one of our instructors gets onto an airplane, flies out to your location, and then delivers the class. Now, if you would like more information on any of these services that we offer, you can reach out to Martha Guerin, and here is her email address, nguerin@wintellect.com. Okay, let's go ahead now and jump into our content. We're going to be talking about really 4 big technologies here in the next hour. And we're going to kind of attempt the impossible. We're going to try to connect all of them together and do stuff locally and deploy things to the cloud. And we're going to hope that everything works in terms of making this webinar a success. The 4 technologies we're going to be looking at are going to be ASP.NET Core 3, Cosmos DB, particularly the Mongo model, Docker, and Azure. So why did I choose these 4 things to combine together? I find that these topics, ASP.NET Core 3 is new, so everybody wants to start learning something about Core 3. Cosmos DB, if you look online, most of the documentation, most of the help stuff that you'll find is all related to the SQL model. So I wanted to take a look at it from a Mongo perspective. And then you have Docker. Everybody talks about it, but a lot of folks are confused about really what Docker is and how it works, and then how to incorporate that into the cloud. And then, of course, I wanted to talk about Azure because Azure is awesome. I've been using Azure now for many years, and it's been a great tool for hosting, deploying my applications. Some of the things I've recently been doing a lot of work with is Azure DevOps. We're not going to be talking about Azure DevOps today, but that's also a really exciting and cool technology too. You should absolutely check that out. So ASP.NET Core was released in September, just a couple of months ago, and it's the latest version of Microsoft's .NET Core platform. It is cross-platform. It runs on Windows, Mac, and Linux. In fact, we'll be doing our coding today using Visual Studio Code on a Mac. If you want to check out more about .NET Core, if you're not familiar with it, you can head over to .net.microsoft.com. And from there, you can actually download .NET Core if you don't already have it. They've got a lot of documentation, tutorials, so on and so forth. Even though we're going to be doing this on a Mac, I'm not really highlighting development of .NET Core on a Mac. We're just doing it on a Mac because I have a Mac. Cosmos DB. This is Microsoft Azure's globally distributed multi-model database. So it's not just a SQL database, not just a Mongo database. It's got a variety of different models you can choose from. And of course, it's globally distributed. And so we're going to be looking at it from the perspective of working with Mongo, just because I think that would be interesting and cool to do. You can actually head over to azure.microsoft.com/enus/free Cosmos DB, and you can actually read up on more details concerning the actual database itself. Docker. Docker is great for deploying stuff in a cloud environment. It's very, very popular. It's one of those things that a lot of people have a hard time kind of understanding exactly what it is. Everybody wants to think of it as like a virtual machine type of thing, even though it's really not. Docker is really about thinking about your software as a standard unit, and then you're deploying that unit, and it includes all the dependencies and stuff with it. And then of course you can host multiple software units all on the same system. If you want to learn more about containers, probably the single best resource to reach out to is docker.com/resources/whatcontainer. That document and the diagrams and stuff they have in there to explain what a container is fantastic. Okay, I always send people to that URL when they want to better understand what a container is. And then finally, we have Microsoft Azure, which is the very popular, it's a leading provider of cloud-based services. Whenever people talk about the cloud, they're either talking about Azure or they're talking about AWS. Today, we're going to be focusing in on Azure and making our .NET Core application with Cosmos DB running on that platform. So those are the 4 different technologies, and our focus here is going to be on how do we basically connect all of these things together. So this is not a webinar on Cosmos DB, Mongo model, or even ASP.NET Core or Docker or Azure. It's a webinar on how do I put all these things together to actually get something live and up and running and working. As we're going through this process, I've selectively chosen different things that I focus on in terms of what's a good way to manage our connection string. So we're not putting the connection string in our source code, but we can manage it on our local system using user secrets, but then actually using an application setting up in Azure itself. How can we get the container up to the actual app service using a container registry? For all of the decisions that I've made, for the most part, there are, of course, multiple ways to do it. Instead of doing a continuous integration from the container registry out to the app service, you could instead incorporate Azure DevOps into that process. So there's lots of different ways. As I go through and do this, I've tried to pick something that I think is workable for most people, but of course the needs of individual organizations and stuff like that will vary. So I'm not in any way saying this is the only way to do any of this. I'm simply trying to put together something that I think is interesting that we can all learn from. So here's what we're going to attempt to do literally here in the next 50 minutes. How to create a new web application with the .NET Core 3 CLI. I'm using the CLI because I'm doing this on a Mac. I'm not going to be using regular Visual Studio, although you could use regular Visual Studio to do that. I'm going to take a quick look at how to Dockerize the web application itself, create a Docker file for it. The Docker file that I'm going to be using will be one that's adapted from the one that Visual Studio creates. We're going to take a look at how to run the Dockerized web application locally. This is actually one of the bumps and bruises you'll run into along the way. If you try to Dockerize it yourself and you're not using Visual Studio, you'll actually run into an issue trying to make it work with SSL. So I want to talk a little bit about that as part of our presentation. Another thing we're going to take a look at is how to create a container registry. Everybody knows about Docker Hub, but you can actually create your own registry in Azure and then use that to deploy to a web application. Next, we're going to take a look at how to deploy that container to an Azure App Service. We're going to be using the web app model for that. Then we're going to talk a little bit about creating Cosmos DB using the Mongo model. Now, what I've done ahead of time is creating a Cosmos DB database in Azure probably takes about 10 minutes for it to go live. So what I've done is I have pre-created our database, and I'm going to show you how to create one, but then as soon as it starts trying to create, we're going to keep moving forward and use the one that I've already created. It's kind of like one of those cooking shows, you know, where the people mix all the ingredients up, throw it in the oven, and 30 seconds later, it comes out of the oven completely done. And that's because it was previously created. I want to show you how to use the Robo3T client software to actually talk to your Cosmos DB, talk a little bit about how to make that connection. And then what I did was I created a very simple ASP.NET Core 3 web application that actually uses Cosmos DB. And I'm going to walk you through a little bit about what that looks like. And then we'll take a look at how to connect that up and run it locally. And we're going to be running it locally and managing our connection using user secrets. Originally, I wasn't going to incorporate user secrets into this. I was just going to throw the connection string into app settings and keep rolling. But the problem is it's so easy to forget to take that connection string back out and then push it up to GitHub or something like that. I decided that talking about user secrets is not only a .NET Core, a great .NET Core feature to talk about, but it's also something that really can be incorporated into this whole process that we're covering here. We'll take a look at how to turn on continuous delivery from the container registry to the web app. So the idea here is that as you push up new containers, the web app will actually detect that and then deploy those. And then we'll push up our new web app container and we'll verify that it all works correctly. Now, what I've done is I have 2 Azure accounts. I actually have more than 2, but I have 2 Azure accounts set up for this particular presentation. And one of them, we're going to be doing all of our stuff in. Should something go wrong, Azure takes too long to do something, something breaks or goes wrong, we'll log into the other account and use that, and then we'll talk about some of the configurations over there. So I do have a little bit of a backup plan in place in the event that somewhere along the way something goes wrong. We're going to be attempting to do stuff on my local machine, do stuff up in the cloud, push Docker containers all over the place. There's a high likelihood something won't work out. So along the way, I want to share with everybody some of the issues, concerns, and challenges that I've run into when setting up environments like this before. I also want to talk a little bit about how to avoid unexpected costs. Whenever I travel around and I teach Microsoft related type classes, and I'm always mentioning Azure to people and trying to kind of sell them on using it, they always push back and they're like, hey, you know, doing stuff in the cloud is like really expensive and it's very easy to get a large bill, especially if you're just doing stuff, you know, personally and just experimenting. So I want to talk about a couple of things you can do to help limit your costs so that you can still explore all of these different features on your own personal time in addition to what you may do at work. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive now into this process. So the first thing you'll need to do is make sure you have .NET Core downloaded. Now I've already downloaded .NET Core on my machine. In fact, we can take a look at my version here, .NET -- version. And you can see I'm running version 3.0.1. So we've got .NET running. Now what we want to do is we want to create a new application from the CLI. So we'll say .NET new web app -o contact tool app. So this is actually going to create a contact tool for us. So now it's going to go through the process of creating the application. It's going to create a folder called contact tool, which you'll see right there. If this is your first time running the code here for .NET and creating websites and trying to run them, there is a command that you will need to run to actually make the certs be trusted. Because one of the things that happens in .NET is when you're creating applications, it always tries to run the web apps over SSL. And so this command here you can run locally. It'll actually make sure the certificates and stuff are already trusted. As you can see, mine are already trusted as well. So we're good to go there. So we've got our application created. Now our next step is I just want to run this application locally, okay? So we'll just say .NET run, and we're just going to verify that everything got set up correctly here to run the app. So we'll give it a second here to run. Cool. So I've got my local host 5001. There's the HTTPS option there. And let me go over to my web browser here. Let's drag this over to there. There we go. I'll go ahead and paste that in. And you can see there's our little contact tool app that was created for us automatically. All right, so our local web app is running. That's excellent. The next thing I want to quickly mention is how we can do a little bit of debugging and coding with the application, and that's with Visual Studio Code. Now, I realize the majority of people in this crowd probably use regular Visual Studio, but I like to use Visual Studio Code even on Windows for doing C# type development. I find it works pretty well. So here I've got a little alias set up on my system where I can type in code and then say code dot, and that'll actually fire up Visual Studio Code. Let me drag that window up there. So here's our project right here. Now I have the OmniSharp extension installed. Most of you are probably familiar with that. This is the actual extension here for providing C# support in Visual Studio Code. Not a big deal, but I do want to mention something. Recently, OmniSharp's been having some issues with the extension working correctly in VS Code. And I wanted to point out to everybody the solution to that real quick, just in case you've actually run into that problem. And it actually has to do with an older version of Mono. Mono is the open source free C# .NET environment that's existed for a very long time. And let me go back to my web browser here. There we go. If you go to the Mono website and you download version 6.4 and install that, if you're getting any of those weird errors inside of VS Code, this will fix that, and then you can start doing your C# development again. If you know, it's one of those things where like it all breaks, but there's not a very clear error message as to why. Installing Mono 6 or later is the solution to that problem. So I just wanted to highlight that here real quick. Okay, next step. Now what I want to do is I want to show you how you could quickly debug this within VS Code. No problem. We'll come under Pages here. I'm going to click on Index CSHTML, and I'm simply going to put a breakpoint right here inside of the Index Models constructor. I'm going to come up to my debug option here on my menu bar. I'm going to click Start Debugging. And this will actually go ahead and set up the actual configuration necessary to start running the program. And then you're going to see here, when it goes to load the page, it actually hits the breakpoint here. So I just wanted to highlight, you can instantly start doing your debugging and development and get your code completion all directly here inside of Visual Studio Code. So we'll go ahead and stop that now. All right, so next on our list is we want to basically Dockerize this thing. So the application that was created here for us does not contain a Docker file. In order to actually use Docker to deploy it up to the server, we need to Dockerize it. To do that, we're going to create a new file here called Docker file. Notice capital D, lowercase f, no file extension. I do have a Docker extension installed in VS Code to give me good syntax highlighting, but otherwise we're just doing regular editing of a text file here. Now what I did was I actually went over to the regular Visual Studio. I took the Docker file that they create and then I modified it to work with our particular project here. Mostly I went in and just adjusted some folder paths and stuff like that. But we have our Docker file here, which is going to set up our Docker container. What you can basically see is that we're going to be pulling down images that already have ASP.NET or ASP.NET Core 3 already set up for us. We're going to be pulling down one image for hosting the application and one image for building the application. And so basically what happens here is we pull down the image for hosting, then we pull down the image for building. And then what basically happens is that it copies over your CS_proj file to a new image that's being created, and it does the .NET restore and then does the build. The idea being that your files are likely going to change frequently when doing development. So we're going to need to rebuild that layer over and over and over again, but you're less likely to change your dependencies. So we don't need to rebuild that layer over and over and over again if the dependencies aren't changing. So we basically do the restore on the dependencies first, then we're going to do the actual copying and build of our source code files. And that'll actually work out better for Docker's layered approach to building containers. Now, once we actually build this, we're going to want to publish it and then finally copy those published files over to the final image that we're creating. So this one little Docker file is really all you need to Dockerize the application and then go ahead and get it ready for pushing it up to a container registry where we can then deploy it with an app service to Azure. Okay, so now that we've got that set up, let's go ahead and do that very thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and build our image. And to do that, I'm going to use the Docker build command. This is going to go through the process of setting everything up for the image. We'll give it a moment here to finish. Almost done. Great. Okay. Now that we've built the actual image, we want to create an instance of it and run it locally to make sure everything works. So how are we going to do that? We're going to come over to here and I've got a command, docker run. We're going to tell it to basically run the application. Well, the application's going to run on port 80, but we want to expose that port 80 as port 5000 on our local actual host. We want to give this a name, and then we want to tell it which image we're using, which is the Contact Tool app. So we're going to go ahead and run this. Everything should fire up for us nicely. If you want to actually view the logs here of what actually happened when it ran, you can say Docker logs, grab part of the hash code there, run that. You can actually see where everything fired up successfully. But I want you to watch something interesting here. Let me bring up Chrome here again real quick. I'm going to go and I'm going to load up regular HTTP, no SSL, and I'm going to type in port 5000, and you'll see everything loads fine. The application's running off the Docker container. But watch what I'm going to do here. I'm going to switch it over to SSL. This, my friends, is going to fail. This is actually one of the little bumps you run into along the way when trying to set up your own Docker configuration. You run into it not only on a Mac, but you run into it on Windows, you run into it on Linux. The question is, why isn't this working? The reason why this is not going to work for us is that A, I'm not exposing the port, but even more than that, we have to have an SSL certificate set up to be able to handle this properly. So how are we going to do that? Well, I've already created a certificate ahead of time, but I want to point out a couple of things to you. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this instance of our container, and I'm actually going to go ahead and say Docker stop, and then I'm going to do Docker remove, and we'll just get rid of it. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to show you about this whole certificate thing. I'm not going to recreate my certificates, but I want to show you the process you have to go through to make this happen. First of all, in your root user folder, there is a special folder called .aspnet. Now in that folder, you'll have data protection keys, but you won't have this folder, the HTTPS folder that you see right there. I actually had to go in there and create that folder. And then inside of that folder, I had to put these files. I had to put a certificate, the key, and I had to put a PFX file, which is really a combination of the certificate and the key together. Now, to create those files, I used the following commands. This OpenSSL command that you see here will be used to generate the key and to generate the certificate and to set it up for the local host. When you run this command, it doesn't even ask you any of the questions. It literally just creates it for you. The second command that I used to produce what you see in that folder was this command to generate the PFX file. And this actually takes the certificate and the key, and then you'll specify a password as part of doing this configuration. So when you do all of that, it sets up these files that you see here. And then what we're going to do is when we go to run our actual container, we're going to set up a volume that maps back to these local files. So how are we going to do that? I have this very long command here. And let me make that wrap. So I'm going to set up port 5001, port 5000, the name. That's why I deleted the old one. It's the same name. Then we have these environmental variables. These environmental variables are the same ones that are configured as part of setting up an actual .NET Core, ASP.NET Core web application. Here we'll say what port the HTTPS is going to run on. And this is where we specify our certificate information for the actual password, which is what you type in when you generate the PFX. And then the actual path to certificate, which is going to be HTTPS localhost PFX. Now, the -v option that you see right here, that -v option is what is going to connect our local folder and mount it as basically a file path inside the container. And then that's how this is able to find that PFX file. And then, of course, the last option, -d, is our actual image that we're using here. So I'm going to take this command right here. I'm going to run this, and we're going to fire up our local server here again on the Docker container. And I'm going to come over here and say localhost 5001. And let's see, shoot, changed browsers on me. Now, it's going to give me a warning about my connection because this is a self-signed certificate, so it's not valid. But it's still going to do things over SSL. I'll click on Advanced, Proceed to Localhost. The first time it loads, you don't get any styling because of the having to proceed, but now you reload it and you get this loaded up. So now what we've done is created an ASP.NET Core 3 application from scratch using the CLI. We've Dockerized it, and we've run it locally, both with SSL and without SSL. Now it's time to make our way over to Azure. Now, one of the intimidating things about working with Azure is people are always afraid of basically losing a ton of money, right? Because you sign up for a few services, you think, wow, this is cool, and then you forget about it. And then about a month later, you get a bill on your credit card for all this money that you didn't even know you were spending. And so the key to using Azure is to use a couple of techniques to help save yourself some money. One of the things you can do is come under cost management, and you can actually set up some budgets. And you can basically say, hey, give me an email at 25% of my budget, 50%, 75%. I actually have it do emails and a text message. But there's actually another way you can also do this to help save a little bit of money if you just want to try something out and then clear it all out after you're done. And that's the concept of a resource group. You'll see I set up for the webinar here a resource group called Wintellect Webinar. If I click on that, you can see all of the resources that are set up under this particular resource group. That is, if it loads up on the screen. Let's see, let's try reloading that again. Resource group. That's weird. Hold on. There we go. Well, yeah, that should be loading up for us. I'm not sure what Azure's getting stuck on. Anyways, you would see all of the items here underneath the resource group. We'll try that again in a second. Anyways, what you can do is set up a resource group, create everything that you're going to do as part of your testing things out under that resource group. Then once you get to the end and you're done, you can delete the resource group, and it will delete everything you created. And so that's a technique that I use when I want to try out stuff on Azure and then get rid of it all at the end, is I'll create it all under a particular resource group. And of course, this is like the first time ever it actually hasn't loaded like it's supposed to, but that's okay. We'll keep rolling. So now that I've got a resource group set up, my next step is I need a container registry to actually push my container up to. So I'm going to come over here to create resource. I'm going to attempt to come over here. There it is. Really? All right, hold on one second. I'm going to relog into Azure here real quick. Let's see here. All right, I'm going to close Chrome. That is very weird. All right, let's just try Microsoft.com. All right, so I'm online. Good. I was starting to wondering if I was just talking into a microphone by myself. Okay, portal.azure.com. This must just be very, very bad luck. Okay, well, the problem is that for all of this to work, I need Azure to work. And let's see. Hey, is it loading now? Hey, look at that, it loaded. Okay, let's try this again. So I'm going to come under create resource. We're going to create ourselves a container or a container registry. So I'm just going to search on registry, and I'm going to click on container registry. So now I've got my container registry. I'm going to go ahead and click create here. So now we can create an actual registry. I'm just going to make up a simple little name here. We'll just call this carrot peas. No one's going to name their container registry carrot peas. This has to be globally unique, so we'll just make up some vegetables there for this. For our resource group, I'm going to come in and say Wintellect Webinar. I've got my location, Central US. I'm going to go ahead and enable the admin user. This is so I can have a login to push up my stuff. Depending upon the SKU you pick, you'll pay different amounts of money. I typically go with basic, but because I'm going to delete this at the end, I'll just keep it on standard. So I'm going to go ahead and click create here. And what this is going to do is going to create a container registry for us, just like Docker Hub. You'll be able to push your you'll be able to push your images and stuff up to the registry, and then from that registry you'll be able to deploy it to things like an app service. So we'll give it a second here to go ahead and create this for us. It shouldn't take very long. All right, it's deploying that out for us. While it deploys that out, I'm going to head back over to the resource group. I want to try to show you what that looks like when you click on it. Here we go. So this is where you can see all the things that are actually set up within a particular resource group. You can see that listed here. Then what you can do is when you're all done experimenting, what have you, you can come over here to delete resource group and you can actually delete it and it will delete everything. So now you can see our container registry has been created. We'll go ahead and go to the resource here real quick. All right, awesome. So this is going to be our actual URL for logging into the actual container registry. Down here, you'll see repositories. We don't have anything uploaded yet, so there's no repositories. Once we go ahead and upload something here in a moment, then you'll see stuff in the repository. To actually access the system, we'll have the access keys, okay? So you can literally see the password here and everything, but I'm gonna be deleting this immediately after the webinar is over. So you're welcome to write the password down if you want, but it's not gonna work beyond the webinar itself. So here's our login server. I'm gonna copy that to the clipboard and I'm gonna come back over to here and we're gonna go ahead and log into this. We'll say Docker login and I'm gonna log into the Carrot Peas Azure CRIO. Come back over to the web browser, you can copy the username and I'll paste that in right there. And then I can copy one of the passwords. We'll grab the first one and we'll paste that one in. Check it out. Now I'm logged in. So now that I'm logged in, what I want to do is I'm going to want to go ahead and push this up. To push it up, I need to tag it first. So let me come in here. I'm going to tag this and we're going to use our Carrot Peas Azure CRIO. Let me grab contact tool app, paste that in. We'll tag that. Now what we're going to do is go ahead and push that up to the server. So we'll just copy that right there, paste it, boom. Hold on one second. Oh, missing the C on my Carrot Peas. Got to be careful on that copy and paste. Okay, so now this is actually pushing it right up to the container registry up on Azure, which is really super cool. So I really like the way that they push these layers and stuff up in terms of the UI experience. It actually, even though it's pushing up a tremendous amount of information because you have the multiple lines going across, it feels like you're accomplishing a lot. Okay, so our content is now pushed, our image is now pushed. Let's head back over to our web browser. And what we're gonna do now is we'll head back down here to repositories, and you can actually see where we've pushed our contact tool app. You can click on that, and it'll actually show the different versions and stuff and tags that have been applied. And what you can do is come over here and click on this, and you can deploy to a web app. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna use this technique to deploy it, and then I'm gonna go talk a little bit more about the details of setting up the web app more on a more manual type level while the app service is being created. So here I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna say deploy to web app. And I can give this a name. We'll call it Contact Tool App 23 is fine. There's my Azure subscription, my resource group. I'll need an app service. I'm going to create a new one. And when you create it here, it will actually put it underneath your resource group. So it also gets deleted when you delete your resource group at the end. So we'll just simply call this our Contact Tool App Demo. Central US is good, so we'll click OK. So there we go. There's our image. We're going to run this on Linux. Isn't that what we all do, right? We all run our .NET Core stuff in a Linux container because it feels cool to run .NET Core on Linux. So we'll go ahead and click Create, and we'll let that run here. So now it's going to be deploying this out and actually creating the app service for us. While it does that, let's come back over here and let's actually take a look at how we would have done this more manually. So we come into here, we can actually search on web app, and you can click on that, click create, Then what you can do is come into here, pick your resource group manually. We'll come into here and give our web app a name. We're just going to make up something here. We'll say contact tool app 45. This is where you'll actually select whether you just want to push up code or a Docker container. We want to do Docker. We're going to do Linux, Central US. You can also come down here and control the size of your app service plan. Obviously, the bigger it is, the more money it costs. We're going to go with the default because, like I said, I'm going to delete this when we're all said and done. They do have a free plan in there. It's really slow, but if you just want to keep something up and running for free, you can check that out if you'd like. But I'm not going to click review and create because I actually want to configure some stuff on the Docker side here. So I'll click next on Docker. We're going to stick with a single container option, but you can actually do Docker Compose if you want to set it up to have multiple containers. Our image source here is going to be the actual Azure Container Registry that we created, so the one that we called Carrot Peas. You'll see it automatically selected the Contact Tool app image. It also automatically selected the latest tag. You don't have to specify a startup command, so this will just work right out of the box without having to create a customized startup command. And then all you would do is come down here and click review and create, and this will actually go and create the actual web app for you as part of an app service. Now, the one thing that this does not do automatically that the other approach does is that this does not automatically turn on the continuous integration for basically pushing out new versions of the image that get pushed up to the registry. Whereas the one that we set up via the registry, that will automatically turn that on for us, okay? So we're not gonna actually create this. I'm gonna back out of this. We'll head back over to here and come over to our resource group again, and we can see some of the things that have been created underneath here while our app service is finishing being created. Okay, and come over here. Deployment is still in progress. Let's see where we are in the process here of getting this up and running. All right. There we go. So we're doing the last part here, which is the webhook deployment. The webhook deployment is the mechanism by which the registry lets the app service know that there's a new image available, and then to deploy that. If we have time at the end, I'll show you what that looks like in terms of pushing up new content. All right, should be almost done here with that. All right. All right, looks like we're almost good to go. Refresh. All right, while that finishes up, I don't want to waste any time. I'm going to jump one step ahead here real quick and just talk about the Cosmos DB part of this. Then we'll come back and finish up this piece and make sure it's running live. Then we'll oh, actually we're good now. Okay, so our actual server, our app service is up and running our web app. So we'll go ahead and click on go to resource. Come into here. Okay, this is our actual URL right there. Before we load that up, I'm going to do an unnecessary configuration step. My unnecessary configuration step is just my own preference. Even though I know that ASP.NET Core environment defaults to production unless you specify something else, I'm going to add it in anyways. And I just like to do that so that when I'm looking at my settings here, I know exactly what I'm looking at. I'm not going to worry about any slot settings and stuff like that. We'll just set it like this. I'm going to click OK. And now I know what my setting here is, and I can see that. Unnecessary, it's going to run as production, but just the way I choose to do it. Now, over here for the overview, actually, before we do that, make sure you click Save. I always forget to click the Save when modifying the application settings. We're going to let that save. Then I'm going to pop over here to Overview. Now, when you first save this, sometimes when you load up the website, you'll get an error, but we'll wait a minute or so and everything should be good. So I'm going to click on this right here and we'll load this up. Give it a second. I'm going to close this local one there, close that. All right, let's try loading that back up. If it doesn't load for you when you expect it to, what you can do is this, and actually I should mention this is actually really important. So you'll see here's our container settings for our application, but down here you'll notice are the logs. Well, if you come in here to the logs, you can kind of see the status of things. Ah, that's why it's not loading. It's still extracting. Just because the app service comes to life doesn't mean the container has been deployed. All right, so just because you have the app service doesn't mean the container's been deployed. You have to come in here and look at the log. You can click refresh. And at the end, when it's all done, you'll see this Docker run command. That means we're up and running. So let's actually reload this. And we should now have our contact tool app. Cool. So we've gone from a CLI command to Dockerizing, to running locally, to pushing to a container registry, to now deploying to an app service. Our next step in the process is to incorporate the Mongo piece. Okay, so we're going to come back over to here. Now, as I mentioned to you, I've already added the Mongo database. And I did that because this takes about 10-15 minutes to actually turn on. But what I am going to do is I do want to show you what it would look like to set it up. So we'll say Azure Cosmos DB. We'll click on that. We'll come over to create. Now over here, you can come in and pick your resource group. There we go. I'm just going to make up a fake name here. We'll call it Apple and Oranges. Now, most people pick the core SQL. That's what most of the documentation and stuff out there shows and explains. Instead, we're going to come in here and pick the MongoDB API. To actually connect to this database with .NET Core, you're simply going to use the MongoDB database drivers, which is really nice. So if you're already familiar with those from working with Mongo, it'll work great here for Azure Cosmos DB. Now, I'm going to pick a different location. Australia is awesome, but I'm here in the US, so we'll pick something a little closer. US Central. I'm just going to grab version 3.6. We don't need the geo redundancy or the multi-region rights. You might need that for your application, but not for this demo. I'm going to come in here and click review and create, and this is actually going to validate it, and I'm going to click on create, and we'll let that run. It's going to take a while for it to complete. We're going to keep moving on with my other database that I've already created here. So if we come back into the resource group, you'll see we already have a contact tool app DB right here. So I'm going to click on that. Now what I want to do is I want to connect to this database here using Robo3T. So let me bring up my Robo3T. So Robo3T is a popular software for connecting to Robo. They have a paid version called Studio 3T. This is the free one. I'm going to come into here and I'm going to, let me bring up the connections. So here I've got a connection. I just want to highlight a couple things about the connection itself. So first of all, this is the address. I got that information from over here in connection string. So in connection string, you have the host. And then for the port number, I got that also from the connection string over here. For the authentication, I've set it up to basically use the username as well as the primary password that you see here. Make sure you select the Scram SHA-1. If you pick the 256, that will not work with Azure. The last thing you have to do is make sure this is all done over SSL. And the default is not to use SSL, but then if you select it, the default will then be to do that. If you have your own certificate, I guess you want to use, that's fine. But you can also just do the self-signed certificate. That's super easy to work with. You can click test just to verify everything connects here properly, which it does. I'm going to cancel out of this. So over here is that connection. So if I come into here, I have a simple collection of contact data, and I'll just view the documents right here. So there's all of our data. So that's actually coming from the Cosmos DB. And now what we want to do is we want to set up our application to be able to consume and to use that data. So because of our limited time together, what I've done here is I have created a prepared version of this. Okay, so now we have our prepared version. Now I'm going to highlight a couple of things in this that you need to know about in order for all of this to work well for us. So over here in services, I actually have a Mongo database service that I created. And inside of this service, I'm basically creating a Mongo client. I'm going to be pulling in a connection string, which I'll show you how to set up in a moment. And then from that, creating my Mongo client settings. Also, as part of that, I'm going to have SSL turned on. Where did I get this code? You can actually get this code over here in Azure. Let's see here. I'm trying to remember where the get started, quick start, here we go. Here you can actually get the connection information that you need for different platforms. This is the .NET, but there's also Node, so on and so forth that you can check out. They also have different code samples and things that you can work with to see how to actually code this yourself. But one nice thing about Azure is it does provide some nice things like this to get up and running with, especially if you're new to the platform or new to the service that you're working with for your application. Now, over here, I've created another service for my contacts. What this service does is it uses my Mongo database service to do things like get the collection and return back everything in it, add something to the collection, or delete something from it. If you've worked with Mongo in like with JavaScript before, with Node, a lot of these commands and these functions are all very similar, very similar to each other in terms of the APIs. Of course, when you work with C#, you're having to get into all the strongly typed stuff, which can be a little bit of a pain, but it's the same basic overall mental model in terms of working with Mongo. Now, over here in our web page, we have a very simple setup. I've got a table which displays all of my contacts along with a delete button. I also have a second form here that's going to be for adding contacts. And so what we want to do is we want to run this locally so that we can actually verify that we can connect up to the database. So the first thing we need to do is we need to set up a connection string. In order to set up that connection string, though, we need a place to store it. We do not want to store it in app settings. We do not want to store it there. Instead, what we want to do is we want to create a local user secret. So if you open up the CS_proj file, I'm going to open up the terminal here, and I'm going to say .NET user secrets init. And this is going to set up a new user secrets for this application. Then what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to add the connection string to that. So there's the .NET user secret set connection string. Now I need to get the connection string itself. And I can do that by heading back over to here, copying this primary connection string, come into here, and then I'm going to, let's see, make sure it copied. Okay. Then we should be able to paste. That's not good. Let's come back over to our connection string. I'm going to grab it manually like this. Okay, so now let's try that again. Perfect. Now, one thing we do have to add to the end of the connection string is this setting of retry writes defaults. Retry writes basically tells Mongo to try to rewrite some data if it fails the first time. That's not going to be supported with our driver here for doing the Mongo stuff with .NET. So we're going to turn that off in the connection string. So now I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and that's going to set up our user secret that was successfully saved. Now what happens is when you run your application in development mode, ASP.NET Core will automatically load up the user secrets as part of your application's configuration. So we don't even have to think anymore about this. We can just get up and running with it. So to run this thing, we're just simply going to say .NET run. And we'll go ahead and let this thing fire up. And we should be able to run our application calling our Cosmos DB. Okay, now let's go ahead and bring this up in our web browser. We'll come back over to here. I'm going to paste that in a new window. And we should get our application loaded up. And hold on one second. We have no data. So make sure I came to the right place. Let's see. Yeah, everything loaded up fine there. Hold on one second. Let's see. Okay, that's apples and oranges. That's not the one I want. I want this one here. And I want to go to the connection string. I'm going to copy that connection string. Maybe, just maybe, I pasted the wrong one in there. So that's SY. No, that's the correct one. All right, let's see. Let's try this one more time. Okay, that's saved. Let's run the application. And we know the data loads up because it's loading up here in Robo3T. All right, and let's reload that again. No. All right, let's see here. Any type of error that we're getting. Oh, all that looks fine. That's very odd. Let's see here. Yeah, that should load up just fine. We should be getting data. It's actually connecting to the database. Let me check something here real quick. So let's come back over to Contact Tool App, and let's come over to here. And what we're going to do is we're going to come over to browse. Not there. Let me click on the, there we go. That's what I want. Then we'll come over to here and we're going to click browse. And we have contacts and we have contact tool. Let's make sure I'm calling the right database. And that's because I'm not calling the right database. We have contact tool app. Let's try that again. Okay, so we're going to run this. And then we're going to come back over to here and we're going to reload. And we've got data perfectly. Okay. One thing about Mongo that can be a little bit frustrating is that because Mongo is basically schemaless, it'll let you reach out and grab things that don't exist and they just return nothing back to you. It's not even like you get an error. Imagine working with like SQL Server and you tried to call a database that didn't exist. You would think you would get an error back or something, which of course you will with SQL Server. But that's not really the case with Mongo. And so basically I just had the wrong database name in there. So I apologize for that. Let's go ahead now and do a couple operations here. We'll just add a contact to our database and we'll say add. Scroll to the bottom and you'll see there's our contact was added. We'll click on delete and you can see we're down to 100 again and it deleted our contact. Cool, so everything seems to be working okay here in terms of using our Cosmos DB locally. Our next step in the process is I actually want to push this up and have it run in Azure. So how am I going to do that? First of all, I'm going to come back over to here and I'm going to stop the server from running. Then I'm going to come over to here and I'm going to add my connection string to my web app running on the app service. So we'll come into here and I'm going to click on the Contact Tool App 23. I'm going to come over to configuration. I'm going to come over here and do my connection string. So we'll add our connection string here. There we go. And then I'm going to copy in my actual connection string itself. So I'll come over to here. Let me go to where I set that user secret. We'll just copy it from there. There we go. So I'm going to grab that all the way down to there. Come over here. I'm going to paste that. It goes all the way to the end. We'll go ahead and save it. So now I've got my connection string set up there. My next step is just to do a final build of this application, push it up, and everything should be deployed as we would expect it to be. So let's go ahead and do that now. So let's go ahead and do our build. This will make sure that we have all of the code that's different in terms of this newer version of the project. Our previous build was using that original project that we created at the outset. Okay, let that run. All right, there we go. Almost done. Boom. Okay, great. Now what I need to do is go ahead and reference our registry again. So we'll come back over to here. Let's actually click save. And then we'll click on this and we'll come back over to the registry and come back over to here. So there's our registry server. So make sure I'm logged into the registry server, which I should be. Then we're going to go ahead and do this step here. Great. Now I'm going to go ahead and push this up to the actual registry. And we'll do that right there. That's now going to push this back up to the registry. There we go. See, all those layers already existed. It just pushed up what was different about this particular application. So all that looks good. Now we'll come back over to here and we're going to click on the app service. We can come over to the actual container settings if we want, and we can come down to the log. And we'll just make sure that this has finished executing. Everything looks good, and you can see it's right after the hour, which means that this is the most recent image. So now if we come back over to here and we reload the app service, we should get our application. All right, let me copy that, close this. Hey, there we go. Must have been a cache issue. So there you go. So there's our actual contact tool being loaded up. Everything looks good there. It's got all the data that we had before. We can just verify that everything works correctly by adding. Then come on down here and delete. So now what we've done is we started off with basically the command line tool, created an application, Dockerized it, tested the container locally, pushed it up to the registry, deployed it to the app service. Then we had a fully created version of the application. We created a new Docker image for that, pushed it up to the registry, it deployed, and had all of that tied into Mongo. And only ran into a few hiccups along the way. Not too bad, I don't think, for pulling in all these different resources together here in just about an hour or so's worth of time. So this shows you the power of what you can do with Azure, what you can do with .NET Core, what you can do with MongoDB, what you can do with Docker. You can do all of this on Windows, Mac, and Linux. It's really super powerful and super awesome. So what I want to do now, before we go to questions, let me go back over to here real quick. Just a reminder here, if you attended the webinar, you can get these different discounts as well as an AppDev Cloud free briefing or question and answer on the project or interest of your choice, or a one-on-one briefing or a lunch and learn, so on and so forth. To make use of any of these discounts or special offers, reach out to Martha. She'd be more than happy to help you with that. All right, let's go ahead and get into some questions now. I do appreciate everybody staying a little bit long here. Let me go through the question list here, and I'm going to be, because I know we had a lot of people come in for this, I'm going to focus on answering the questions that deal with the integration of these technologies, and if I get through those and we still have some people hanging around, I'll see about trying to answer some of the other questions that go beyond that. Like I said, we're talking about a lot of different big technologies here. We could probably have endless questions across the board. Okay, so let me go through here and look. All right. In terms of the content for this, I believe Wintellect will be making the content available. I'll be giving them all of the source code and all of the other little pieces of documentation that I've collected together for this. So you can go back and check this out later if you would like to. And it was recorded, and I do believe they make the recordings available, so you should be able to go back and watch this a little bit later. Question here about the .NET Restore. So in today's .NET Core world, a lot of the commands like .NET Build or .NET Run will automatically run restore if you don't have the dependencies already pulled down. So that's why I didn't have to do any explicit restoring. If we go back a few versions, of course, in .NET Core, you would have had to done the restore part manually. And of course, restore still works. You just don't have to do it. Okay, why do I have to mount it instead of copying certificates to the image? So I didn't really want to copy the certificates to the image. And the reason why I didn't want to do that is then those certificates would be on the image no matter where I deployed it. I really wanted the certificates to be external to it, so the certificates wouldn't be tied to the image. They would be tied to how I invoked the image or started the image and created that instance. That was the advantage to putting that in the command line the way that I did. Like I said, that was just a little bit of a local hack so that I could run the container over SSL locally. My preference, Azure over AWS. So here's the thing. I have multiple Azure accounts for creating courses and stuff like that and actually using it for stuff. I also have an AWS account that I use. I'll tell you why I like Azure better. I actually really enjoy using the portal. Now, I know a lot of people are big into the whole PowerShell thing, and I do PowerShells too as well with Azure. But I really like the portal, and I got started with Azure probably, I want to say 2012. I don't want to say a year that's too old and Azure didn't exist, but if my memory is correct, I remember setting up my first websites on Azure back in 2012. I've also kind of always been a part of the Microsoft ecosystem. My first web applications that I ever built was with Classic ASP, and then moving on to ASP.NET and so on and so forth. So I've always done a lot of stuff in the Microsoft ecosystem, and of course, Azure is great for that. But here's the thing, even if you're not using Azure, you can still create a Dockerized container, push it up to AWS. In fact, one of the cool things about Azure DevOps is it works with everything. If you want to have basically your own CI/CD system for free, and you want to pull your code from any Git repository, build it on any platform, push it to any cloud provider, Azure DevOps is for you. So while Microsoft definitely likes to sell Azure services, no doubt, Microsoft has become a very open company in terms of supporting all of these different platforms and stuff like that, and integrating them together, so on and so forth. Like I said, I'm doing this presentation on a Mac. Now I realize .NET Core on Mac is nothing new, but having been in the Microsoft ecosystem now for 30 years, it's really amazing and cool to think that I can be on a Mac doing a webinar for Wintellect and showing you how to do .NET programming with Microsoft's Azure platform. It's just really cool. It's one of the most open type of environments that really exists out there for doing software development. I won't be personally sending the recording, but I believe you'll be getting a follow-up email. You can also check back at the Wintellect website as well. All right, let's see here. All right, cool. All right, so a question here about the difference between the Azure Container Service and the Kubernetes service. I have not used the Azure Kubernetes service. I know that's going to be disappointing to hear. So I can't really give you an answer on that, but I did not want to ignore your question. I appreciate you hanging in all the way to the end here and asking. I haven't used the Kubernetes service. I typically work with my single containers for web apps. So just kind of give you a little bit of background information about me. My primary focus is on building web applications, and I do a lot of stuff on the JavaScript side in addition to the server side. I do a lot of Angular, a lot of React, stuff like that. So when I come to Azure, especially for projects that I'm personally working on, I really use it from the vantage point of having a web application being backed by some type of database. And because I'm not typically containerizing my database or even necessarily even setting up necessarily other containerized type things, Kubernetes is just not something that I've dived into on Azure itself. So I can't really tell you the difference. All right. Any other questions from anybody on any of this? Okay. Well, thank you all very, very much for hanging in there past the ending point. We still have probably 75% of the people who we started off with still here, and I appreciate everybody joining us today for this. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Wintellect and ask. And if you want to get a hold of me, reach out to them, and they can get you in touch with me, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have on anything. Thank you all very much, and thank you for the kind compliments, by the way, in the questions section. I was really, I do webinars, I do videos, I do live streaming, I teach in-person classes all the time, and for this particular webinar with all the different things that we were pulling in together, I was concerned that stuff might break along the way, and we had a couple of hiccups, but in the end, I think it all worked out pretty good, especially considering what we tried to do here in an hour or so. So best of luck to everybody with your future programming endeavors. I wish you all the best, and hopefully I'll see you again on another webinar, or if your company reaches out for a class, I'd love to teach you some of the things that I know in this area as well as others. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful day.